Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here with another Friday Reads. I have been reading two outstanding novels this week, one on audio and one in print. I think I can say right now that both of these will end up on my best of 2025 list, which is saying something in the first weeks of January. First, in print, I've been reading Writers and Lovers by Lily King. This is a buddy read with Melinda at a web of stories. I don't know why we waited so long to finally do a buddy read together. We're old online friends, old virtual friends who've never met in person, but we knew each other in the blogging world for probably the last 15 years or so. And then we both came to YouTube at about the same time. So we've kind of watched each other's kids grow up online. We have talked about books on our blogs and on BookTube. I feel like she's a good friend, but this is the first time we've done a buddy read together. Now, in my defense, I'm kind of new to buddy reads. I've only done two before, both with Nikki of Red Dot Reads, who isn't keeping her channel up at this point. And Nikki and I have become really good friends just through the buddy reads. So I've had great experiences, but I was looking to do it again. And I'm thrilled that Melinda agreed to buddy read this with me. We're having some great discussions. We're kind of on different reading schedules, but we're working it out. And I love hearing her thoughts on the book. So, Writers and Lovers is about 31-year-old Casey. It is 1997, and she has just moved to Cambridge, Mass., which is the area where she grew up. I kind of missed where her exact hometown was, but she's from that area, the New England area. So this is kind of a homecoming for her, but she's really there because she doesn't know what to do with her life. She's 31, she's at loose ends. She just lost her mother, I think just a few months before the novel opened. Her brother lives all the way out in Oregon. Her father, you learn more about him as the book goes on, but he's not much of a father. So she's really feeling kind of alone in the world. She's at loose ends. She does have some friends in Cambridge because she had lived there before and shared an apartment with other writers. So Casey is a writer, or she wants to be a writer. She's written some short stories before, but her big project is a novel that she's been working on for 6 years, and she feels stuck with that as well. So that's where Casey is at the beginning of this novel. She's working as a waitress. She's subletting an apartment from one of her brother's friends that is actually a potting shed. It is tiny, it is pretty rustic, and she's just dealing with a lot right now. A lot has gone on in her life that she hasn't fully dealt with yet. That's where we meet Casey. Now, throughout the novel, a lot happens. You can see, those are just the tabs that are visible. Early on, I was using these little pointer things, which are really cool, until I ran out of them. So there's more of those. Grief is at the center of this novel, both very acute, recent grief for the loss of her mother, but also some older losses and older traumas from her childhood that she's never really dealt with. So there's some deep old grief as well as some fresh new grief. And I think the fresh new grief is kind of bringing everything to a boil. Oh, I didn't mention she's also recently left a boyfriend in Spain. So this is about Casey trying to figure out what to do with her life, trying to move forward. Grief is at the center of it, but it is really a novel about healing and learning to move forward and what is required to move forward. So I'm very close to the end now, and Melinda's already finished it. And things are starting to turn around for Casey. Now, they get a lot worse before they start to get better. Not a spoiler, just that's a typical novel. There's conflict and then it's eventually resolved. I am really enjoying this book. I love the way the author writes. Melinda and I were both saying that the way she writes characters and pulls you into these characters, it makes them seem real. There's a scene where Casey's at a party at her friend Muriel's house with a bunch of other people. And so she's meeting these people for the first time. But the characteristics and elements of their personality that she chooses to highlight and how she puts that is both a testament to the fact that Casey probably does have what it takes to be a novelist, and also that Lily King is an excellent writer. I have felt completely immersed in this story. I've really enjoyed going along with Casey, rooting for her on this journey. And I can't wait. I should be finishing it today. I can't wait to see how things wrap up in Writers and Lovers by Lily King. And thank you to Melinda for buddy reading it with me. Yesterday, my neighborhood book group met and we discussed The Brier Club by Kate Quinn, which I listened to on audio, and it was outstanding on audio. But this was a winner for our whole group. Now, very often, we don't all agree on a book, which is what makes it a great book group. We have some great discussions, we get pretty in-depth, and we usually rate the book at the end of our discussion from 1 to 10. Very often with a book, the ratings in our group will range from like 5 or 6 up to 9 or 10. And, there's a range. With this book, there were 9 of us who voted on it. 2 people gave it an 8, and the other 7, including me, all gave it 9s. Now, I and many of the other people in my book group don't normally give 9s. This book is really special. If you've read Kate Quinn before, you know that she is just brilliant at historical fiction. She very often takes a real life person or event and builds a story around it. This one is a little bit different because there's a whole cast of characters and none of them is based entirely on one single real person. But what Kate did was pull in information about the time and the place, and particularly what women were experiencing then. So let me tell you what the book is actually about. It begins in 1950 in Washington, D.C. There's a rundown boarding house in the city run by a mother, and she's got 2 kids. Pete is 13 or 14 when the novel opens. His little sister is Lena. So this is not like a really fancy place, like maybe some of the books you've read about some of the boarding hotels in New York. This is kind of a rundown place, inexpensive. It's 1950. So all of the women there are at this moment in time on their own. And it covers the period from 1950 to 1954. So there's a lot going on. And in the author's note at the end, Kate Quinn points out that a lot of people look back on the 50s as a very quiet, placid time, a time between wars, a time between controversies, kind of a golden time in America's history. We think of the 50s as the rise of the middle class, and Kate kind of blows that all apart because she digs into the events going on at that time that affected these women in the boarding house. The Korean War, which I didn't know. Most of what I know from the Korean War, and a few other people in book groups said this, is what I know from MASH. But this book is looking at back in the U.S., people's attitudes. And apparently the U.S. government downplayed the Korean War. Many people here in the U.S. didn't even think about what was going on at that time. Obviously, our view of it in hindsight is different, but I found that really interesting. So some of the characters here are directly affected by what's happening in the Korean War. And certainly they're reading a little bit about it in the news, but not much. One of the big events in the background of this novel and affecting the women is McCarthyism. Senator Joe McCarthy's famous or infamous search for all the communists in the U.S., the Red Scare. This is the period of the Cold War, this fear. At the beginning of the novel, the Rosenbergs are on trial and then they're sentenced to death. So there's this fear that Reds are all among us, that communists have infiltrated our society. So that paranoia is a background here. And of course, the 50s was not a great time for civil rights, for women's rights. And the focus here is on the women of the Briarwood house, which is the name of the house. So at the beginning of the novel, a new resident named Grace moves into the house and changes the lives of everyone there. Grace starts up a Thursday supper club. Now these are teeny tiny rooms. Their kitchenette is really just a mini fridge and a hot plate. But somehow these women manage to cook up these amazing meals on their hot plates up in Grace's room, which is the smallest of them all, in the attic. And these Thursday night gatherings, they nickname it the Brier Club. And this becomes the way that these very different women come together and interact. And what Kate Quinn has done in this novel is she's taken all these things that women at the time were dealing with. The end of World War II, and for women, that meant leaving the workplace. There's a woman professional baseball player living in the Briarwood house, leaving jobs to go back to the home. The fact that women had no control over their lives. If they were married, their husbands controlled their money, their health, their life, everything. The lack of options for women in terms of birth control and the way that those options, even that were available, were restricted. There are even some older women that experienced some horrible things during World War II and are trying to heal. She's just packed so much into this novel. And there's a murder mystery here. You know that right from the start. There's a scene in 1954. Like I said, Grace moves in 1950. Early on and throughout the novel, there are scenes, kind of flashes of 1954, a flash forward of the police investigating a murder in the house. And there are little clues, but you really don't know what happened until the very end. So that thread is running throughout the novel as well. Although many in our book group said you didn't need the murder mystery. This book was so fascinating. The characters were so engaging. The novel itself is just so engrossing. The lives of these women, each woman gets her own chapter where you dig deep into her background, what she's dealing with, and you can see that all of them are hiding secrets. And not necessarily, some are pretty big secrets. Some are just, that was at the time, and I guess to some extent today still, you just pretend everything is fine, but especially for women at that time. You put on a happy face, you dress perfectly, you pretend everything is fine, when inside things are not fine. So every topic you can think of that would have affected women in the 50s and still affects women today in many cases is addressed in this novel, and beautifully. The way Kate Quinn pulls it all together is just fabulous. So our total rating for this book was 8.8, which is It's a tie for the record. But oddly enough, our last book, Chicago by Brian Doyle, also got an 8.8 from the group. So we're on a good streak here, and then a great way to start the new year. The audio is fabulous. The narrator is so talented, and she gives each woman her own voice, her own character. She really brings her A game here. At the end of the audiobook, there's actually an interview with both Kate Quinn and the narrator, and it's just fascinating. So I loved this book from start to finish. So did every other member of my book group, which doesn't happen very often, and I highly recommend it. So that's what I'm reading this week. I would love to hear what you're reading. Please let me know in the comments down below, and take a moment to like and subscribe to my channel.